power of the object of your faith is derived from the power of your faith in the object. If all the work I do is my offering unto you, then my very life becomes my prayer unto you. Faith works. Faith alone works. But that faith that works is possible only when your surrender is complete. Devotion alone will lead you to that surrender. Why lose a lifetime to know how to live? Why not use a lifetime to live? See, once the heart has decided, there is very little the mind can do to stop it. Doubt enough till you have faith. Having imposed your faith, stop doubting. Choice is born out of my intelligence. Consequence is born out of his intelligence. That invisible ingredient where 101% of my heart is involved in what I do is called devotion. Every experience, whether it teaches you what to do or not, it certainly teaches you what not to do. Faith is beyond your intellectual judgment. Strength of character is born out of obstacles overcome. Growing in surrender is the only way by which you can let faith happen in your life. Prayer is something he does unto himself through you. You are just an instrument. In Bible it is said, when two or more people assemble together and pray, blessings descend. The whole concept of places of worship, the churches, the temples, the mosques, the satsangs, the study groups, the Sangam Saranam Gacchami, is formed on the premises of this spiritual understanding that when two or more people assemble together and pray, blessings descend. When there's a congregation of about 2,000 spiritually aligned, spiritually seeking people assemble into one auditorium, have faith, blessings descend. Whatever be the purpose for which all of us have come together, let that purpose manifest itself in the times to come for the good of you and for the good of humanity as a whole. And in that faith, that this collective human vibrations would earn that existential grace, I begin. Let's first listen, experience, relive a few stories on faith. Two incidents happened in the last week of January 1948, which perturbed emotionally, even an otherwise spiritually centered Mahatma Gandhi. What even the British Empire could not succeed in doing, in terms of jerking him emotionally. Two incidents that happened in the last week of January 1948 emotionally jerked Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi said this: "It seems this country no more needs me. Now all that is left is, if bullets would pierce my heart, and in that instant, if I can hold the name of my Lord on my lips, I know I have lived a spiritually aligned life." I repeat, it seems this country no more needs me. Now all that is left is, if bullets would pierce my heart. Exactly the same thing happened 2 days later. Bullets pierced his heart. Not the head, not anywhere else, right into the heart. If bullets would pierce my heart, and at that instant, if I can hold the name of my Lord on my lips, which is exactly what he uttered, "Hey Ram, hey Ram, I know I have lived a spiritually aligned life." So much to the power of faith that when a thought was released by a man anchored on so much faith, even if it were thoughts of death, I could say he willed his death. He not only willed his death, he willed the way he wanted to die when bullets would pierce my heart. He had already willed how he wanted to drop dead if I can hold the name of my Lord on my lips. He had challenged himself, or even on the threshold of death, I should know that I have still lived a spiritually aligned life. And he succeeded in that challenge. Here was a school teacher who didn't even have the aspiration to be headmistress of a school. She did not even think that she had the capability to be the head of a school. She never saw herself beyond a regular teacher who can impart knowledge. But you never know how life designs the turning points of life. It does not come knocking at the door. It comes through experiences. It comes through ideas. It comes through events. It comes through triggers. It comes through the ceiling. It comes through the windows. It comes through a keyhole. It comes in a page in a book. And here was this lady who was absolutely convinced she cannot even be head of a school. And life already had a larger plan for her. And life let a man die in her hands. She went from hospital to hospital seeking help. And she heard every hospital utter the same thing. People dying in the streets of Calcutta is a very regular happening. If every hospital has to attend to every person who dies in the streets of Calcutta, we can't run the hospitals. And he died in her hands. A simple thought triggered in her mind. There are enough institutions in the world which offers dignity to those who are living. Why not I start an institution which can offer dignity to those who are dying? What is it that if man cannot die with dignity? She decided to start the missionaries of charities, pronounced her decision to the church. But that was not the purpose for which she was brought. So she was denied the permission, but she decided she is going to go ahead. And one of the priests asked her, "You don't have fame, you don't have connections, you don't have money. What makes you believe you can succeed? You can't even help yourself. How are you going to help the world?" The school teacher said, "I don't have the fame. I don't have the connections. I don't have the money. But I have God with me. And He will give me the rest." The rest is a script of faith. Today, missionaries of charities feeds every day over 4 million people in over 122 countries. The rest is a script of faith. Now the big question is our heart anchored on such faith? My ability to believe that I am not even able to see is faith. My ability to trust for which there is no validation is faith. To believe what seems unbelievable is faith. The big question is my life anchored on that sort of faith? Rajan, I go to temple, nobody is questioning it. But you go to so many temples, you have a lot of alternate gods. In case this does not work, contingency planning. Your devotion itself has second line, third line, fourth line. There is a Monday God, there is a Tuesday God, and there is a Wednesday God. If the faith is so total, then you don't need a Monday God and a Tuesday God. Our situation is something completely different. A lot of us keep cheating ourselves saying, I have faith, which isn't faith at all. I want to cross the road. And just then a 5-year-old kid comes and says, Uncle, even I want to cross the road. I put my finger out and tell this kid, hold my finger tight and move along with the finger. I run 3 steps into the road. The child holding this finger of mine also runs 3 steps into the road. Then I stop. The child too stops. Then I move 5 steps to the side and the child also still holding the finger moves 5 steps to the side. Somewhere seeing a truck coming, I come back 2 steps and the child too comes back 2 steps still holding on to the finger. Sometime running, sometimes stopping, sometime walking. Sometimes walking sideways, sometimes going backwards, but eventually I cross the road. And still holding on to that finger, the child too crosses the road. What was it to me? A responsibility. What was it to the child? A game. He was having fun holding this finger. Didn't matter to him whether bus was coming or truck was coming or car was coming. What mattered to him was to hold the finger and move with the finger. Didn't ask this question, if I have to go to that side of the road, why is this uncle going back 2 steps? Didn't ask those questions. Now when there is no supposition in faith, then that little child holds on to that finger asks not. Why? To reach that end of the road, the uncle is walking sideways. The goal is to reach that end. Why is he going backwards? The goal is to progress to that end. And why is he stopping in the middle? These questions the child should have asked before holding the finger. Doubt enough till you have faith. Having imposed your faith, stop doubting. The child should have asked this question before holding on to that finger. It had already held the finger, and now all question ceases. There's nothing called examined faith. There's nothing called a faith which has passed your judgment. There's nothing called a faith which I have tested, I have qualified, and now finally I think I shall have this faith. Faith is beyond your intellectual judgment. The error of the child will be, if that 5-year-old holds the finger and then starts examining and evaluating, is the uncle good enough to help me to cross the road? And this is the story of a lot of us. We hold the finger, we go to the middle of the road, and somehow now our intelligence interferes with the intelligence which is guiding us. And somehow this limited intelligence tries to evaluate and judge that limitless intelligence. And because this limited intelligence now tries to evaluate that limitless intelligence, because we are basically people where we feel where our prime minister is wrong. I don't think he should have taken this decision. Sitting in front of the television, he has opinion about Sachin Tendulkar should not have played the ball like that. In the backyard of his house, in one pitch catch, first ball he gets out. But he has an opinion about how Sachin Tendulkar should have played. Invariably, I have heard people say, if my MD continues to run the company the way he is running, he has to close down this company. Who is the MD? He runs a 3,000 crore company. Who is this person who has made the judgment? Clerk trainee under probation. Nobody is free from our judgment, and even he is judged. Our faith is a case of faith where right in the middle of the road, we leave the finger. If you had complete faith, you can cross the road by yourself, to which a lot of atheists belong to. Now, he does not believe in God. He doesn't even think there is a God that exists. But he at least has one faith. I know I can cross the road. And he crosses the road. Paralad. That is okay. Then there is this category where it's not my will. It's thy will that will be done. Inshallah. God willing. There is this other category which will hold the finger. And no matter not what happens, will hold on to that finger to the end. Even that category will cross the road. Unfortunately, the majority is, it will hold the finger and midway through the road, leave the finger. Now you hold that uncle's finger for 2 minutes. Then you hold this uncle's finger for 2 minutes. And it's suffering for everybody because you're not helping anybody to help you to cross the road. Our situation is, we want to arrive at a faith which is born out of intellectual judgment. Faith works, there's no question about it. In fact, faith alone works. But is it faith yet is the big question. What happened to Gandhi and what could happen to Teresa can happen to everybody. provided the heart is laden with such unquestioned, doubtless, a faith which is transcendental of suppositions, a faith that is not born out of judgment, a faith that happens, a faith that is not a decision, but a happening. And for us to anchor our life onto that faith, and when our life is anchored onto that faith, life becomes a game to you and me. Like what the Hindus refer to as the Leela. It becomes a game unto you and me. Crossing the road is no more a struggle. It becomes a game because you've already transferred that responsibility. And for us to be able to live a life anchored to that faith, there are a few mistakes that we have done in terms of comprehending this faith which needs to be corrected. Because you believe your faith in Jesus Christ alone is capable of giving you the results. He believes his faith in Allah alone is capable of giving him the results. She believes her faith in Krishna alone is capable of giving the results. That boy believes his faith in Ganesha alone can give him the results. Everything works. Nothing works. For it does not depend on the object of your faith. It depends on your faith in the object. Man made a very huge error of judgment as he began to grow into a religious, a spiritually aligned individual. A very huge error of judgment was done by man. His faith in the object of faith gave him results. There were two components in his faith. One component was the object of faith, the Krishna, the Rama, the Christ, the Mahavira. The other was the subject, that is himself, his faith in that object. It gave him results. He made a huge error of judgment. He believed the object of faith is giving him all the results. Because he believed the object of faith is giving him all the results, he started believing more and more that his object of faith is very powerful. The error of judgment of man was that he didn't realize it is his faith in the object which is giving him results. That is why for him Hanuman works. That is why for him Jesus Christ works. And that is why for her even Jesus does not work. When the very same Jesus Christ works for one person and does not work for the other, it's a simple thing which my maths teacher taught me in life. Is it to the whole class I teach a plus b whole square equal to a square plus b square plus 2ab, but that student is able to get 100 out of 100 and you get only 32 out of 100, then the difference cannot be in the teacher. Same class, same subject, same teacher, same teaching methodology, and yet one is able to get 100 and the other is able to get 32. That means there is a difference in the student. The very fact Christ works for her and does not work for him. The issue here is no more Jesus Christ. The very fact that he is able to experience a life of abundance in having embraced Allah, and there is a life of scarcity for him in spite of embracing Allah, then the issue is not Allah. Same God, same place of worship, same ritual, same approach, same chanting, same offering. But man made this error of judgment. He thought his object of faith is very powerful. It is giving him everything. And somehow his entire focus shifted to projecting to the world that his object of faith is very powerful. And that is why the discussion is always between whether Jesus Christ is more powerful or Krishna is more powerful. Matters not. The issue is here not whether Jesus Christ is more powerful or Krishna is more powerful. The issue is my faith more powerful or your faith more powerful? Is my faith total or is your faith total? That's the point. Because everything works. Nothing works. That is why no less than a servant called Hanuman told Rama. And Rama is everything to him. What Rama meant to Hanuman is, Hanuman used to think standing erect when Rama is standing is disrespect to him. So he used to always bend his knees and stand. And when Rama sits, he used to think appearing taller than Rama itself is disrespect to Rama. He used to squat on his knees and sit. And that Hanuman tells Rama, Rama, my faith in you is more powerful than you. Rama is bewildered. He says, how can your faith in me be more powerful than me? Hanuman says, that's how it is. Just uttering your name, I crossed the ocean and went to Sri Lanka and came. You need one bridge. Just writing your name on a stone, that stone floats. You try? My faith in you, Rama, is more powerful than you. Which is true. And this is where Hanuman got it right. Man got it wrong. Somehow we believed all the results that happens in life, that is why you change your gods. Rather than working on making your faith more total, with every launch of a new operating system by Microsoft, you also change your God. You have 2-year gods and 3-year gods, temporary gods. In fact, this is the communication. One new temple has come, it's very powerful, go. This is the communication itself. Ever since I started going to that church, I am experiencing the results of life. Yes, why? Not because of the church, because there are a lot of people who go to that church who don't experience the results. This faith that you have developed in yourself, this church works. In fact, all the religious wars, all the killing of brethren, all the riots, killing in the name of religion across the world, the wars that are fought in the name of religion, everything has one common premise, that I have to prove my God and my religion is superior to your God and your religion. Gods are not fighting with each other. Disciples are fighting with each other. And the error is because the entire focus seems to be to ask this question, how powerful is the object of faith? Listen. I'm going to tell you something very profound. The power of the object of your faith is derived from the power of your faith in the object. The power of the object of your faith is derived from the power of your faith in the object. In fact, for me, everybody works. Christ also works for me. Allah also works for me. Krishna also works for me. Even I work for myself. Everything works. That's why I say everything works, nothing works. The question is not, is the object of faith powerful or not? The question is my faith in the object powerful or not? Is it complete? You don't have to evolve the God. You have to evolve your faith in that God. That is why for that person who believes tree is God, for him even tree works. That is why for that man where work is worship, work works. That is why for that person where his principles are his God, his principles work. That is why for the guy, next day after tsunami, he still worships the goddess of ocean and goes back into the sea and comes back. For him, even ocean works. And that is why for the farmer, the goddess of soil, Mother Earth, works. That is why the bull he keeps worshipping, continues to feed him and the family year after year. The bottom line is, the power of the object of your faith is derived from the power of your faith in the object. Do I have that faith where I will be able to stand in front of the object of my faith and say, my faith in you is more powerful than you? Faith works. Faith alone works. But that faith that works is possible only when your surrender is complete. Only when your surrender is complete. The very ritual, I won't say any more Hinduism because a lot of culture in India has embraced this now, of taking your child to your chosen deity and tonsuring the head is to symbolize that surrender. When a king is in battle with another king and when he loses, as a mark of surrender, the king who lost the battle will remove his crown and place it at the feet of the victorious king. This ritual symbolizes the king who has lost is telling the victorious king, till now I took care of the welfare of all my people. Now that my kingdom has become your kingdom, my people also become your people. I transfer the welfare of my people at your feet. Please take care of them as your own people. That is what surrender is. Surrender is transference of responsibility. Because I can no more be responsible for my people, because this is no more my kingdom, I transfer the responsibility of my people unto you. Surrender is transference of responsibility. So it is on these lines this ritual is formed, where when the child is born, the parents take the child to their chosen place of worship and tonsure the hair. For us, this is the crown, symbolizing, I transfer the welfare of the future of my child at your feet. My Lord, this is not my child, it is your child who will grow with me. I transfer the responsibility of the future of my child at your feet, my Lord. And that is what surrender is. Transference of responsibility. A culture like India, if everywhere you are expected to surrender, you go to learn Miridangam, the first thing that's expected of you is unquestioned surrender. You go to learn dance, you go to learn karate, you go to learn to fight with your sticks, you go to learn music. Doesn't matter what you want to learn. The first quality every teacher wants to qualify out of you is, are you capable of surrender? Objective subjects like physics and chemistry and mathematics can be learned irrespective of what is your feeling towards the teacher. Because in an objective subject like physics, the teacher is transferring words to you. But when a music teacher teaches you music, she is transferring a part of herself to you. When a dance teacher is teaching you dance, she is transferring a part of herself to you, any subjective subject. That is why spiritual growth is not possible without surrender, because a spiritual teacher is not transferring words to you, is transferring a part of his energy unto you, which is not possible if there is no surrender. And surrender is not possible without the willingness to transfer that responsibility. In the child holding the finger has already transferred the responsibility of crossing the road to the intelligence that will guide. I remember when a set of students wanted to go on a strike, the professor of mathematics collected all the students and wrote 1 followed by 3 zeros on the board and asked the students, how much is this? A student shot back saying, 1,000. Brilliant, said the professor, and added 1 more zero. Now how much is this? The student shot back, 10,000. The professor smiled and now added a zero to the left of the 1 and asked, now how much? The student said, still 10,000. The professor asked, last time I added a zero, you increased the value. Again I have added a zero, why are you not increasing the value? The student said, I don't know all that, but this is only 10,000. The professor explained, when an insignificant number follows a significant number, it gains value. When the same insignificant number tries to go ahead of the significant number, it has no value. So is the relationship between a teacher and a student. When the student is willing to follow the teacher on any subjective subject, where the transference is not knowledge and mere thoughts, where the transference is not mere skills, but the transference is a part of the teacher itself is transferred unto the student. Unless the student is able to follow the teacher, he does not grow in value. There's no value to him. If that is to a mortal teacher, if Guru Bhakti is expected where man wants to embrace another man as a teacher, what is expected of man when he wants to embrace that divine force, by whatever name you call it? Because the object of faith does not matter, faith matters. What is your element of surrender? It's an old story, but the moral is very new. Where the man is sitting in the boat, completely centered, and the wife was normally somebody who gets tense for everything, and there is flash floods. The boat is completely losing its sense of direction. It looks like it might capsize. And the man is still centered. Her botheration is not that the boat might capsize. Her botheration is he is not upset about it. So she couldn't stand her man being so centered. So she keeps on nagging him. Why are you not scared? Why are you not scared? Why are you not upset about it? He immediately takes a knife and puts it at her throat. She says, we are about to die and now don't play with me. He says, I'm holding a knife at your throat and you're calling it a play? I'm not playing with you. She immediately says, I know how much you love me. You won't hurt me. So I know it is only a game. The man slowly withdraws the knife and says, I know how much he loves me. So I know he won't hurt me. He's just playing with me. He's just playing with me. She immediately asks him, so part of the play, suppose we die? The man smiles back and says, that's exactly what Christ told his apostles. If death be the gift of my Lord unto me, will I refuse it? if death be the gift of my Lord unto me, will I refuse it? In Vedic tradition, they call it as prashada buddhi. The ability to see anything that is given to me in life as his gift. Anything, let him give me what he gives me, but I will take it as if it is his gift unto me. And that's what Christ said. If death be the gift of my Lord unto me, will I refuse it? He said, if part of this game has to be death, neither you nor me can stop. But there is one thing that we can stop. Anchored to that fight, I can stop myself from being miserable. I can be happy. Because I'm watching the whole thing as a game. I've already transferred the responsibility of my future to that force that is guiding me. Why we are not capable of the transference of responsibility? We are not capable because we have not understood a very simple premise, that while my life is a life where I have to keep executing choices, for every choice there is a consequence. While I have complete control over the choices of my life, I can't control the consequences. To cross the road is a choice that I execute. Will I cross the road or not is a consequence which I cannot completely control, because there are infinite number of existential forces that controls this moment of life, which I am not able to comprehend. So I call it by one name called God. I just call it by one name, God. I just don't know what is that. But I know every moment of my life is controlled by infinite number of existential forces. To choose to cross the road is in my control. The consequence of crossing the road, many things can happen. I'll cross the road, as simple as that. I might cross the road and find a treasure at that end. Halfway through I might change my mind, or circumstances might force me. Maybe the police will control the traffic and ask me to go back. I could be hurt in the process. Anything can happen, but I don't control it. Surrender is possible when there is a deep-rooted understanding in you and me. Choice is born out of my intelligence. Consequence is born out of his intelligence. My intelligence is acting based on the parameters that are available at my disposal. I have only so much information. I have only so much data. This is my maturity. And out of this maturity, I am acting, I am executing certain choices. But there is an existential equilibrium that has to be maintained. I am crying because my father has died. I am not looking at life beyond the death of my father. I am crying out of my attachment. But when we see existence as a whole, the time for the next child to be born has already come. And in order to maintain this equilibrium, some form has to be removed from this earth so that the child can be added into that earth. But that I am not visualizing. And in order to maintain this existential equilibrium, some form has to be taken. It happened to be my father. It could have been neighbor's father too. At that time, in one house somebody is crying. In another house celebration is going on because a just born is just born. Choice is born out of my intelligence. Consequence is born out of existential intelligence. And this is what surrender is all about. I'm not talking about a passive, irresponsible, inactive surrender. I'm talking about a dynamic surrender, saying, I will execute this choice. This is my expectation of a consequence. I don't know what consequence I will get. But no matter what the consequence is, in that state of surrender, it is not my will, it is thy will that will be done. My will is the choice that I have executed. Thy will is the consequence that you have handed over to me. And I will accept it. But I will not sit in passive acceptance. I'll go back to execute the next choice. That doesn't mean I won't cross the road again. Yeah, I started this business. I really believed that I was making the right decision. But chances are I started the business at the wrong time. The timing backfired, and timing is very crucial for business. The very same people who started a software consultancy a few years ago, and because of September 11th, a lot of them who had lost, some of them lost their business, some of them lost their money, some of them lost their confidence, some of them lost their life. The same people, they can start now and they will flourish. Timing is a very critical factor on any new venture. I executed a choice. There were infinite number of forces that acted, and the consequence was that my business did not progress. Failures are failures in life because they feel I'm not cut out for business and stop. There are people who succeed in life because they say, if that was the consequence handed over to me, I've grown in maturity, I've grown in wisdom, now I know what not to do. Every experience, whether it teaches you what to do or not, it certainly teaches you what not to do. And with this maturity, I'll go back and execute a fresh choice. I'll start again. I will re-enter the market. And that is how a lot of people have flourished. Quitters never win and winners never quit. And they proceed in life. To me, this is surrender, the ability to understand not always my will be done. Sometimes my will is thy will. So I feel I executed this choice and everything happened the way I want because my will was thy will. Not always. That is why those of you who follow that Islamic faith, every major decision of yours, you begin your communication by saying, Insha'Allah, God willing. In fact, after Karna is dead and Arjuna is crying, saying that I killed my own brother, I killed my own brother. Krishna laughs at Arjuna and says, Arjuna, where are you getting this feeling I killed. So beautifully Krishna tells Arjuna, you cannot move your thumb without my permission. This thumb of yours cannot be moved unless I permit you to move. In fact, it's a beautiful exposition in Rig Veda when it says, even in the prayer that you offer to the Lord, don't get ego involved saying that I am offering prayer. For this thumb cannot be moved without that existential grace. And Rig Veda so beautifully concludes, prayer is something He does unto Himself through you. You are just an instrument. Prayer is something He does unto Himself through you. That is what Inshallah is. This is what I want to do. This is my decision. This is my choice that I'll see you in the evening. Inshallah. Is that surrender there? That surrender is born when we can abide by what Sadhu Vaswani so beautifully portrays when he says, there are times God upsets your plans so that He can execute His plans for you. One way of looking at it is, he was very earnest about coming to the program. He came early also, but he missed the program. Another way of looking at it is, who knows, this incident might make him live his life much more planned in future. Chances are somebody who missed the program, the way they will look at this incident, they might get more transformation than somebody inside the hall. There are so many ways to look at it. A very close friend of mine was seen going outside because the gates were closed. And out of a very sincere apology, I called him on the mobile and said, I'm sorry, this is the biggest hall we have. Spontaneously he said, Rajan, the way I'm looking at this, somebody today needs the program much more than me. So the way I'm looking at this, somebody is sitting in my chair and getting transformed. It's okay with me, an event. Now this is surrender. Choices, I want to attend the programs I have come. For what existential factors was I denied the program? I will not understand because I am looking at life through a keyhole. And this existential equilibrium is operated with a much higher intelligence. Christ has to be crucified for Christianity to begin. The end of Christ was the beginning of Christianity. The messenger had to be taken away in form so that the message through Bible will live on. There's a much larger plan. That is what Sadhu Vaswani screams when he says, God upsets your plans so that he can execute his plans for you. And I want to add a sentence to it. God upsets your plans so that he can execute his plans for you, and his plans for you are always right. You may not understand it. You may not understand it. Why what happened today, we will understand only day after tomorrow. And that is why a lot of us, what we believe to be a failure in life, 10 years later we look back and see, it was actually not a failure, it was a turning point. We feel we lost that relationship in life. And that time you cried too. But it's only with due course of time you look back at life and realize, I lost that relationship because this relationship had to happen in my life. That was not supposed to be my relationship. That came to give me some experience. That came to give me some maturity. That relationship came into my life to teach a lesson and it's gone. And this reformed person in me is now enjoying this new glorious relationship. There's a purpose behind everything. Only when that surrender, where there's a holistic willingness to transfer that sense of responsibility. I will continue to act. I will continue to decide. I will continue to execute choices. I will continue to progress. I will continue to have momentum in life. Understanding, not necessarily I will always get in life what I want. Not because existence wanted to deny me that, but it has a different plan. The first question is there that unquestioned faith? The second question is, if that faith has to happen to you, then you need this unquestioned surrender. Where your intelligence will not interfere with the intelligence that's guiding you in life. The ability to take the consequences of life with equanimity, with a tranquil mind and with equanimous emotions, to be able to live your life with that prasada buddhi, saying, if death be the gift of my Lord unto me, will I refuse it? To be able to live your life with that act of surrender, where I may not understand why this consequence has been handed over to me, but there is a larger plan. After all, this life is not my will, but thy will that will be done. The ability to remain centered and peaceful, even during times which are testing, challenging, when bullets could pierce your heart, to still be able to hold on to the name of your Lord on your lips. That state of surrender, to know that I am not alone in my life. There is this formless presence which is guiding me all the time, which is unfolding through me all the time. That my life will be a journey where I will go as far as I can see. And I can only go as far as I can see. When I go there, it will show me further. In the court of Duryodhana, Draupadi's sari is being pulled out. She does what you and me will do. She runs from man to man, asking for help. Nobody there to help. When she realizes no man is there who can help, she decides to try God. Capital letters, try. So she holds the sari in one hand and with the other hand she asks for help. Narayana. Contingency planning. If you come, otherwise I will take care of myself. Still doesn't work. Reaches a point when she knew that she can't help herself and there's no man there who can help. He alone can help. And in a state of total surrender, finally, she raises both her hands. Having let go everything, she holds her hands and says, Narayana, and help comes. In the beginning it was, everything of me, nothing of you. Then in the middle it was, something of me, something of you. Then there was a point of, nothing of me, everything of you. And that is surrender. Nothing of me, everything of you. And in that state of surrender, that existential law manifests itself where the power of the object of faith is derived from the power of my faith in that object. And in that state of faith, miracles happen. In that state of faith, a school teacher who did not even believe that she could be head of a school builds an institution which feeds 4 million people. And in that state of faith, he transcends the ocean and comes back. In that state of faith, gravity is defied, even if it's mythology, but there's a message for you and me. Growing in surrender is the only way by which you can let faith happen in your life. And it's only when you let faith happen in your life, what you always believed to be a miracle is no more a miracle. In fact, what is miracle all about? I'm sitting in a branch of a tree. It's only a supposition for the sake of the speech. Let us suppose that I'm sitting on one of those higher branches. And one of you is sitting in one of those lower branches. And from where I'm sitting, I see a bullock cart is coming. So I tell you, who's sitting in one of the lower branches, a bullock cart is coming. From where you're sitting in that altitude, the bullock cart is not visible. So you say, no, bullock cart is not coming. I tell you, no, a bullock cart is coming. You again look and you again tell me, no, it's not coming. I don't argue with you. No intelligent person will ever argue with a fool. And if he argues, he is not an intelligent person. Now, I don't argue with you because there is a point in my life, I have sat in the branch in which you are sitting. And there was a point in my life, somebody told me a bullock cart was coming and I thought he was lying. So I can empathize with you. So I leave it to time. 20 minutes later, that bullock cart comes into your vicinity. Even from your altitude, you are able to see it. You look at me and think, I'm performing a miracle. I could bring a bullock cart just because I said a bullock cart is coming, bullock cart came. You think that man is amazing, he performs miracles. He's not performing miracles. He's just sitting in a branch slightly higher than you. You need to go to day after tomorrow for you to understand today. He is able to understand this day after tomorrow from today itself. Itna hi farak. Only so much is the difference. That is the difference. In management parlance, you will call it as vision. In spirituality, we call it as faith. If you can also go to that branch of faith, you will also know a bullock cart is coming. There are no more miracles from that branch of tree. Miracle is my inability to see what is coming before it comes. And if I can go to that branch of faith, I will also be able to see that bullock cart coming. And the only way I can reach that branch is if I become capable of that surrender. And that surrender is nothing of me, everything of you. That surrender is the ability of the flute to understand. The bamboo was cut. All the other bamboos laughed. This alone did not. It cried out of pain. They were all so happy. It asked God, why are you testing me like this? Then that bamboo was gasified. It was seasoned. It was burning. Why are you testing me like this? There were a lot of other bamboos which was there in the stores, and they all laughed at this bamboo. You alone have to go through what you're going through. Then hot iron rods were taken and holes were drilled into this bamboo. It screamed of excruciating pain. And a lot of them who were lying down, scattered here and there, actually rejects. They all felt so blessed because they didn't have holes drilled through them. This alone screamed in pain. Why I am alone tested so much? A few days later, it seems one of those evenings in Kamaraj Hall, 1,800 people went on a standing ovation. And that's when the bamboo realized it went through everything it went through so that it can become a flute in the hands of Hari Prasad Chaurasia. It had to reach the hands of a master. And no ordinary bamboo will ever reach the hands of the master. And unless you are willing to go through all that you are going through, you don't become an extraordinary bamboo. You don't want to be tested, you won't be tested. But if you are not tested, you won't be created. You don't want to go through the toughness of life. Don't go through the toughness of life. In fact, life not testing you does not mean it's blessing you, it's giving up on you. It is the trees that stand the winds alone that will become timber. The rest will not. You don't want to be tested. And you don't want to be tested because that surrender is not there. He is putting me through something so that I will get created. Life is testing me. The muscles that are challenged, which become strong. Strength of character is born out of obstacles overcome. A lot of us don't have the strength of character because we don't want to face obstacles. You want an easy life. There's no easy way to the top. You're asking, what? I should climb the tree, have bruises, fall a couple of times, experience thorns, one bee will sting. I have to go through all these things. If you have to go to that branch of faith, you have to labor the process of climbing to the top of the tree. And all this will not be a suffering to those who understand that life is putting me through all this so that I can reach the hands of a master. In the materialistic realm, if you join the right organization and if you find the right boss, you'd consider yourself a lucky flute. In the spiritual realm, if you can find the right spiritual teacher, you'll consider yourself a honor seeker. In the religious realm, eventually when you reach that state of faith, where it doesn't matter what that object of faith is, but it always works for you, You'll call that as your spiritual evolution. Is there that surrender? That is the big question. Nothing of me, everything of you, and I know you have a plan for me. Do you have that surrender? She read in the scripture, he, the silversmith, throws you into the furnace and just watches. She didn't understand the meaning of the whole thing, so she went to see a silversmith at work. So she saw that silversmith, took a piece of metal, threw it into the furnace, and he was watching. She asked him, "That's it?" He said, "That's it." She said, "Now that you have thrown it into the furnace, why do you have to watch? You get up and go." He said, "No, I can't do it because if I leave it like this and go, it might get burnt. So many times I will have to take it out, cool it, and put it back into the furnace." That is when she realized what the scripture meant. He, the silversmith, throws you, that piece of metal, into the furnace called life. And there are times when you scream saying, "I can't take it, I can't take it." You're taken out. You're cooled a little. Thrown back into that furnace again. Rajan, when I say I can't take it, why should I be thrown back into the furnace? And that is why a couple of times after you said, "I can't take it, you are finally taken out. And after that you are not tested, you are not challenged. And that is where your life ended." Rajan, what about all those pieces of metal which was always willing to go through this furnace? Ketale, that lady asked that silversmith, "When will you know that it is time for you to permanently take it out?" And the silversmith said, "When I can see myself in it, I know it no more needs the furnace. When I can see myself in it, I know it no more needs the furnace." She realized, he, the silversmith, throws you, that piece of metal, into the furnace called life. And out of compassion takes you out so many times when you say you can't take it, but when finds that is your very nature, you are left out. You are born as a metal and you die as a metal. But those who are willing to go through this furnace of life, understanding there's a larger purpose to it, in that state of equanimity and tranquility, willing to learn from life, developing that strength of character, overcoming all the obstacles, being an instrument, knowing very well thy will be done and thy will is good for me. You're upsetting some of my plans because there's a larger purpose to it, which will unfold later. We are talking about the man who was the epitome of compassion, the messenger of God. Why should he be crucified? So that the message called Christianity can live on. We are talking about why in that court a woman was put through what she was put through, so that you can be taught what surrender is all about. Nothing of me, everything of you. You're asking why people had to die in the streets of Calcutta, so that we will discover a Mother Teresa. You're asking why apartheid, why blacks should be treated as slaves, so that we will come to know of a Nelson Mandela. Why 300 years of slavery, you're asking, so that we will know a man walked in the same land that you and me walked, by name thy Mahatma Gandhi. You're asking why am I chiseled so many times, so that you will become a statue worthy of being worshipped. You're asking why am I put through everything, so that you can reach the hands of the Master. You're asking why this furnace called life, so that he will be able to see you in him and him in you. God became man so that man can again become God. He, the silversmith, throws you, the piece of metal, into the furnace called life, so that you can come out as glittering silver. So that in this lifetime, when you are still embodied, when you still need to breathe oxygen to live, you can still live the life of divinity on the move. It's not a furnace. It is creating you, it's not burning you. When that act of surrender is there, for the first time you will know what that faith is. And when you know what that faith is, for the first time you will know, in that state of faith, there are no more miracles in life. Everything is possible. Faith works. Faith alone works. But what will lead you to that surrender? Devotion alone will lead you to that surrender. What is devotion? A very simple explanation I give to devotion is, take a lime, cut it horizontally into two, squeeze it, add a little sugar, a pinch of salt, some cold water, stir it. It's called lime juice. She also makes it, he also makes it, it's given. One tastes good, the other does not taste good. Why? Both used lime, both used sugar, both used salt, both used water. One was very unhappy about making this lime juice. The other was delighted in making that lime juice for you. There is an invisible ingredient which was added into this lime juice. That invisible ingredient is what I call as devotion. You can taste the food and immediately say whether it was cooked with happiness or unhappiness. You can immediately say. By tasting the food, I can tell you whether it's a happy cook or an unhappy cook. In fact, if I ever go to a restaurant and I find the food is not good, when I come back, I call the manager and tell him, your chef needs an increment. He is not happy with the salary he is getting. It's showing on the food now. That is that invisible ingredient. I love you so much. Two people can say, in one you can feel the love, in the other you cannot feel the love. The other is just expression of words. The other is expression of the heart. And you know the difference whether that invisible ingredient is there or not. That invisible ingredient, where 101% of my heart is involved in what I do, is called devotion. Somebody told, chant Gayatri Japam properly. And every day if you chant Gayatri Japam properly, your Kundalini will raise. And when your Kundalini raises, you will be able to move mountains with it. He has been chanting Gayatri Japam for 17 years now. And he thinks Gayatri Japam does not work. That's not the problem. Gayatri Japam works. The issue here is, he doesn't have time for Gayatri Japam. So in the bike, he is doing multitasking. Gayatri Japam he is doing. No, I'm on my way to office only. In 10 minutes I'll come. Okay, take care. Bargo se Bargo. And he doesn't know why it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Akbar was praying. He had gone for hunting and it was time for namaz. So he was in that state of namaz when a woman ran past him at great speed and in the process knocked Akbar down and she continued to run. Akbar was very disturbed and angry that he was disturbed during his prayer. He told his soldiers to go and get that woman. They went and fetched the woman. Still holding on to that anger, Akbar asked that woman, how dare that you disturb anybody who is in prayer, and that to the emperor? She said, honestly, my lord, one, I don't know you are the emperor. I have not seen you. Two, I didn't notice you were praying. And three, I didn't even know I knocked you down. Akbar said, what tenacity? You make the mistake also and you claim innocence also? She has to be put to death. The lady says, if that is the command of my emperor, I will take it. But before I am taken, just want to ask you one thing. I was doing my work. I heard the scream of my husband. Somewhere he had fallen down, and I could hear the scream of that hurt. Out of love for him, I ran to see what had happened to him. My emperor, I want to ask you this. What is that? My love for my husband was so much that I didn't even notice that I hit an emperor on the way. And what is love for God that you have? That you notice all these things happening around you. So is it, my emperor, she asked, my love for my husband is greater than your love for your God? Helplessly, Akbar released her. Do you have that devotion? Simple thing that you are expected to do. After you perform all your transactions in the temple, of dropping 50 rupees into the undi and asking for a tender for 1 crore. And I'll tell you why you don't get that tender, because your competition put 51. So God gives it to a better bidder. After you finished all the transactions, all religion is asking you to do is sit in the temple for a few minutes. It's not in the subject of discussion today, but only in a state of non-doing can you inherit vibrations. In a state of doing, you can't inherit vibrations. That is why in every place of worship you are asked to close your eyes, go into a state of sensual withdrawal and be in a state of non-doing. For in a state of non-doing alone, I don't want to use the word meditation because a lot of you has specific religious connotation to it. So I want to use the word non-doing. In a state of non-doing alone, vibrations can be transferred unto you. It's not the whole puja that you do. In the few minutes you are able to sit in a state of non-doing after the puja. It's not the rituals that you perform, but that few minutes you are able to sit in a state of non-doing after the rituals are performed. It is not the entire session of yoga that you practice, but in the few minutes of non-doing you are able to sit after your entire session of yoga. It is in that state of non-doing. It is not the entire 2 hours of speech. Those few minutes you can sit after the speech in a state of non-doing, that is when vibrations are transferred unto you. But even in a speech on spirituality, when the program ends, you run as if the last scene in the movie is over, so that you will be the first one to take the bike and go. Your house will remain there even 15 minutes later. But it's a spiritual law. Only in a state of non-doing, vibrations will be transferred unto you. And hence you are expected to sit in a place of worship for a few minutes by yourself, and that we are not able to sit. Everything distracts us. We tend to see here, we tend to see there, we tend to see everywhere. We overhear everybody, we want to chat, we want to gossip, we want to do everything. It seems impossible for us to anchor ourselves unto ourselves. Is that devotion there? Where an M.S. Subbalakshmi is sitting and singing, tears trickling down her eyes. An end of the concert, she goes down, and a few people in the crowd come and tell her, "You sang very well today." She smiled and said, "Where did I sing for you? I was singing for my Narayana and he was listening to me. I was crying because he came to listen to me, and so I was crying. You all listened to me was incidental, but I didn't sing for you. I was singing for him. In my state of devotion, I forgot myself. I forgot my body. I forgot even that I exist. Nothing else can explain devotion. Then Rama comes back. And it's time for return gifts. So Vibhishana gets back Sri Lanka. Everybody is there. Whoever helped, they remembered that it's time to get their return gift. So everybody was surrounding Rama. Each one was happily taking whatever Rama was giving to them. And as everything was being distributed, Sita gently taps Rama and shows in that corner. Anjaneya is sitting, chanting the name of Rama as if nothing is happening. He doesn't even know something like this is happening. Even that time of his was anchored in devotion. And this is the power of devotion. Rather than Hanuman coming to Rama, Rama goes to Hanuman. That's the power of devotion. So Rama and Sita move towards Hanuman, and he still doesn't know. Sita asks Rama, what will you give him? You have satisfied all of them, but what can you give him? Hanuman can feel the fragrance of the presence of Rama. So he opens his eyes. He can feel that presence. That's what I'm referring to. A lingering, formless presence. When you reach that state of faith, not by decision, consciously, subconsciously, unconsciously, even in your sleep, you know you're not alone. There is that existential, formless presence, a lingering presence. And Hanuman feels that presence and opens his eyes. Rama tells Hanuman, what will I give you? Because others gave me what they are capable of. You gave yourself to me. So what will I give you? So I've decided I'll take you along with me to Vaikundam. In Vedic parlance, it's heaven. I've decided to take you along with me to Vaikundam. How much we do to go there? Hanuman was not excited. Hanuman immediately asked Rama, will you be there? Rama says, see, I won't be there as I, but as Mahavishnu I will be there. Rama is only an effect. The cause is Vishnu. As cause I will be there. Mahavishnu is there, but I won't be there. Hanuman tells Rama, then I won't come. I will not come anywhere where Rama is not there. Rama tells him, that is also me. Hanuman says, this alone to me is Rama. Nothing else is Rama. I won't come anywhere where you are not there. Rama tells Hanuman, but a time will come when even I will go. With tears in his eyes, Hanuman tells Rama, a time will come when you will go, but your name will not go. Somebody in this earth will still be chanting your name, and I'll somewhere sit in one corner and keep listening to your name with tears in my eyes. That's enough for me. I will not come. That is devotion. When you become capable of that devotion, there's big pride in you that you wrote Sri Ramajayam for 1 lakh times. And 1 lakh times you wrote when Mega Serial was continuing to go in front of you in the TV. For you it has become multitasking now. In fact, even in state of coma you will write now Sri Ramajayam. But where is the devotion? You pride yourself in saying that I pray 5 times a day. I'm a true Muslim. Devotion. Somehow we have quantified our relationship with God, forgotten the quality of it. 1008 times I chant a jabam. 1008 times is not the point. Once wholeheartedly. Once wholeheartedly. I go through Periya Padai to go to Sabaribala. Periya Padai, Chinna Padai, no Padai. Does not matter. What is the devotion you carry as you take those steps? All the disciples told the master, we are going on a pilgrimage trip and coming. Master asked, why you want to go on a pilgrimage trip? So that we can improve our devotion. Master said, okay, go, but please. He offered one karila, pavakai, and told him, wherever you go, place it also in the altar of God, take the blessings and bring it back. So not only the disciples, even the Karila went on a pilgrimage, temple to temple. And finally, when they came back, the master said, please cook that Karila and serve it to me. They cooked and served it to him. The master tasted it and said, surprise, even after the pilgrimage trip, it's still bitter. How come? Immediately the disciple said, but the nature of it is bitter. Master said, that's what I'm saying. Unless you change your nature, pilgrimage will make no difference. If you don't change your nature, what makes you think a pilgrimage trip will change everything? You're trying to change gods. I'm asking you to change yourself. You're trying to change rituals. I'm asking you to change yourself. You're trying to change your approach to God. I'm asking you to change yourself. You're trying to increase the quantity of your offering to the Lord. I'm asking you to change yourself to improve the quality of your relationship with Him. If you can carry that Hanuman in your heart, that Christ, that Mother Teresa, that Mahatma Gandhi, and we are all capable of it. It's a moment away. It's a decision away. It is one correction. I will no more try to change the things out there. I will change the things out here and out here. What needs transformation is not my God or my approach to God. What needs transformation is I need a change. Not just when I offer my prayer. Because there's nothing called part-time devotion. In the lime juice that you make, I should be able to experience the devotion. In the food that you cook and the food that you serve, I should be able to see the devotion. In sitting next to the feet of your Father and gently pressing those legs which stood all its life for you, I should be able to feel the devotion. In that little one that you have given birth to and carrying it in the chest when it is going to sleep, and because you believe a jerk in your body will disturb the child and you are almost motionless during those moments, in that love for the child, I should be able to see that devotion. In the way you step into your place of work, I should be able to see that devotion. The disciple in Rig Veda says, Lord, you have given me so much and I have nothing to give you in return. I thought I will offer these flowers to you. But these flowers are already yours, my Lord. Whose flowers will I offer to whom? I thought I'll offer these fruits to you, but these fruits are also already yours. Lord, why have you put me in such a helpless situation that you have given me so much? I want to give you something in return, and I have nothing to give you because everything that I want to give you is already yours. So I thought I will pray to you in words, but even the air I articulate is already yours. Lord, why have you put me in such a helpless situation that I have taken so much from you? I have nothing to give you. Out of sheer helplessness, my Lord, I drop my body at your feet. And he drops the body at the feet of the Lord as an expression of gratitude. This I had read, and it had lingered in my mind for a long time. Then one of those times, I no more go to places of worship. There's no necessity. But there was a time I used to accompany my mother, and when I did, I saw my mother was negotiating for the best coconut. I've never seen her do that. Because here is a lady who would negotiate with you for LIC building for 10 rupees per square feet. And here was the same lady who was willing to offer the highest price for the best possible coconut. And as I was going inside, I asked her, this is not you. She said, "Namma nalladhu kuttadhaan avan nalladhu kudupaan." So I realized, probably each one of us have programmed ourselves in such a way that anything that we offer to the Lord, we believe should be the best. told my mother to go inside. I said, I'm not coming inside. I sat under one of those pillars, closed my eyes and told myself, if it is true that we offer you nothing but the best, from now onwards I shall offer you nothing. I shall no more pray in words. But my Lord, all the work that I do will be my offering unto you. The intelligence of mine is yours. This body is yours. This life that I have is yours. The oxygen I breathe is yours. Everything is yours. But to put all this raw material together and create a finished product called work, that is my creation. And Lord, I will ensure that this work that I create from now onwards will be my offering unto you. And because we offer you nothing but the best, I will ensure that any work that I do is nothing but the best. I ended that day's communication with him saying, if all the work I do is my offering unto you, then my very life will become my prayer unto you. There's nothing called part-time devotion. Devotion is, in everything I do, 101% of my heart, bhakti will be there. If the work you do becomes an offering unto Him, then your place of worship becomes your first temple. Then you don't step in tomorrow when you go to work thinking you're going to office. You go to a place of worship. Then every customer becomes a divine representation. Then the way you relate in the family, you come home and that's another temple for you. The day I realized in everything He is present, then everything is a place of worship. The need for a place of worship was gone. There was a devotion that prevailed in everything that you do. And when there is this devotion in everything that you do, the manifestation of this devotion, the manifestation of this invisible ingredient will be that act of surrender. The result and effect of that surrender will be that faith. And the result of that faith will be the miracles that you will experience in life. For months together, there were no rains. The people in the village were struggling. They had called a sage, supposed to have constant communion with existence, and said, you have to help us out. And the sage came. And he said, today we will perform an yagna in which I want all of you to participate. And even before we perform the yagna, it will start pouring. The entire crowd kept assembling at that one place of yagna one at a time. Soon the place was filled with people. And all of them came there because they believed in the sage. They believed in the sage. That he says before the yagna is over, it will start pouring. And as the crowd was increasing, there they saw one little boy alone came holding an umbrella in his hand. And the sage said, all of you can go. That boy is enough for me, for he alone has faith, it will rain. And in the faith of that one boy, the whole village will benefit, for it shall rain. Why? The power of the object of your faith is derived from the power of your faith in the object. It's a beautiful life. It's a game that we are playing, thinking it's a game against life. It's not a game against life, it's a game with life. The player with whom you play chess is not against you, because win or lose, you learn the game better by playing with him. So how can you call him an opponent? He's teaching you that game. We are not living with life against us. We are living with life with us. The expression of this life will twist us, will turn us, will test us. It'll give us beautiful days. It'll give us days when we will be challenged. And we all can win in this game for life because we were sent here for winning. Let's no more live our life as plastic roses, plastic faith, plastic surrender, plastic devotion. When people are around you, there is a different devotion. When people are not there, let's stop living this. Let's be true to ourselves. Let's be true to that heart. That's what devotion to me is. In fact, I don't mind the atheist. He says nothing is there and he's trying to fight life all by himself. The inexcusable people are, I believe in God. Ayyo! The inexcusable people are those who morning to evening keep vomiting the name of Lord, and yet there does not seem to be this manifestation of that faith in their life. It seems all these plastic roses were there on this side of the compound wall, and on that side of the compound wall there were those real roses. So one day all these plastic roses peeped through the compound wall to see what was there that side. And one little plastic rose said, I feel like going that side and being part of them. It seems all the elderly plastic roses said, don't go there. See, for us there is no death. That side you will die. For us nobody will harm us. That side everybody will harm us. We have no fear here. There you have to fear all the time. Don't go that side. This is a beautiful place for all of us to be. See, once the heart has decided, there is very little the mind can do to stop it. The heart of the little one had already decided. So by night, that little one jumped over the compound wall and went that side and became a real rose. Next day morning, all these elderly plastic roses peeped and saw. This little one was already this side, and the bud was beginning to bloom. By mid-noon, it was gorgeous. Slowly towards the evening, petal by petal, it began to wither. Towards the end of the day, it was already drooping, about to die. It seems all the elderly ones said, see, we told you don't go there. It's not worth it. It seems the little one replied, you're all looking at what I am losing. You're not looking at what I have gained. What I have gained is, by coming to this side of the compound wall, I know what is fragrance, which I never knew on that side of the compound wall. If you are born as a rose, you should know what is fragrance before you die. Otherwise, why call yourself a rose? God became man so that man can again become God. We jumped into this furnace called life so that in this lifetime, we will live such a life that He will be able to see Himself in you. We were born as pieces of metals only to ensure our life will end by we being glittering silvers. Every school teacher can be a Mother Teresa if your heart can ladden itself on that faith. Any Atma can be a Mahatma if your heart can ladden onto that faith. Every man can be a messenger of God if his heart can ladden onto that faith. Let's not pass out from this world without knowing the fragrance of true faith. And to know the fragrance of true faith, you should be able to let go both your hands. If we can live a life which is 101% of heart in everything that we do, if we can know that bhakti will lead us to a life of nothing of me, everything of you. That surrender will lead us to faith. A faith where the power of the object of the faith will give power to that faith. That object will prevail through you, not because it is powerful, but because of the power that you have on that object. The power of the object of faith is derived from the power of your faith in the object. And when we can live our life with that fragrance of faith, we live a life from that higher branch, from that highest branch, from which there are no more miracles, for from there, everything is possible. I would like to end with the story of the Upanishad, where the bird from the lowest branch looked up and saw the bird from the highest branch, kept telling this bird, "Come." The bird in the lowest branch was not interested. It continued to live there, but after some time, experiencing the bitterness of whatever was there in this branch, it felt, "I deserve a higher branch." It hopped to a higher branch. The bird from the highest branch still said, "Come." Still, this bird was not interested. It continued to remain there. But after some time, experiencing the bitterness of this branch at that maturity of life, it realized it deserved a higher branch. It hopped to the higher branch. Hopping one branch at a time, eventually it reached that highest branch. Eventually. And this is the tragedy of human life. Eventually we get it right, but we lose a lifetime in the process. But from the beginning, that bird from the highest branch kept saying, "Come." You didn't have to wait to eventually go there. Why lose a lifetime to know how to live? Why not use a lifetime to live? But when this bird reached the highest branch, and only after it reached the highest branch, it realized from the beginning there were never two birds. My own higher self was all the time calling my lower self, "Come." And I didn't listen to it. That higher self in all of us is that faithful self. As much as I tell all of you, it's time for you to go, I also want to tell all of you, it's time to come. Love you so much.